We haven't been able to create a fair or happy world, nor have we succeeded in living as a sustainable human ecosystem so far. To face both problems, it's time to look back to more natural patterns and search for the picture of space-time that frames evolution with quantum and cosmological scale. To the root of the matter, the question eventually becomes, what is time? We need a new perspective. First, we have to define the variables involved. Start from Einstein relativistic distance and follow Hawking on an equivalent imaginary coherent time. Imaginary as a probabilistic space centered on the self and coherent with the information distance on a discrete tick. On the other hand, remember the Maldacena correspondence and map the imaginary time coherently to the surface in a flat and relativistic space. Call absolute time the emergent discrete tree in the anti-de Sitter bulk. Imagine a neural network that grows at each beat and projects the surface information at every cycle as the most efficient deep learning algorithm. Absolute time is a memory-saving entanglement information of surface quanta as correlation among distant points. Exploiting the fractal cell similarities of natural phenomena, it encodes the information on the surface quantum foam through a wavelet decomposition along time geodesics that become roots in the bulk. The absolute time beat becomes a reference clock and is connected to the universe quantum potential. It is a delta locally coherent with the bounce of photons at the horizon of the current universe. It allows non-locality of space and, as Bond said, the unbroken wholeness of the entire universe. Eventually, the universe evolves. At every cycle of absolute time, it emerges as an inflated 3D space, from minus infinity to plus infinity in the imaginary time, and 2 degrees of freedom, like a color movie on a holographic screen. After defining the variables, we should picture the simplest entities. Starting from bosons, we can see the single qubit and elementary strings pulsing coherently on the surface and leaving no trace in the bulk. Photons flow at sea in the imaginary time. Gluons link together to persist coherently in the absolute time. Fermions are networks on a common beat. They emerge from the link of surface quanta that reduce their degrees of freedom to become interconnected in the bulk, in a single and more complex entity. Absolute time beat as a sync tune allows the decoding of the particle as a quantum memory network, persisting in the current space-time as a coherent self. Consider the entity self-decoding through its pulsing roots in each current beat of absolute time. Call momentum in time the energy probability density, and eventually the imaginary position of the rest mass in time. It is the real persisting information, here and now. Due to the roots in the absolute time, the entity shows inertial mass, like a resistance to additional noise in the imaginary time. The beat of the momentum in time defines, in its varying positions in the imaginary space, the quantum potential and the local additional curvature of space-time fabric on the surface. Following Einstein and the relativistic average perspective, time momentum describes the beat rate related to rest mass and frequency. It's the particle phase on the absolute time reference and assures persistence of surface information along the universe evolution. Space momentum sees the propagation in a probabilistic space and the velocity relative to the coherence with light. It shows a wave of being in surface transformation. The combined momentum describes the coherent information on the surface as a quantum Hamiltonian operator. It develops along a logarithmic spiral in a relativistic description of space and time. Given the variables and the entities defined so far, gravity could be seen as a gradient in absolute time sync rate. It is derived as a combined angle of relative perception in reference to the Planck scale for length in space and mass in time. The Newton force then becomes the feeling of a nearby slower beat, calling from stored complexity and future possibilities. From this new perspective, we can also map the Dirac equation to Shannon entropy as the sum of the information rate of change over the past ticks of absolute time. It comes on a log spiral from the first-order derivative of the wave function real component. Entropy is a summary of the knowledge shown so far on the surface and an indication of quantum potential. Black holes are networks storing max mass per minimum arc of distance on a holographic surface. The maximum information stored in the absolute time leads to maximum surface curvature. The optimal local compression of information makes black holes equivalent to a source with maximum Shannon entropy. From outside, decoding becomes impossible without prior knowledge. In the inflated space emerging from the fabric of space-time, a black hole hologram results one tick away from the surrounded coherent now. On the horizon, the space derivative along the imaginary time goes to infinity, as on a hard step on the surface. The local fabric information becomes too out of phase to be coherent, like a decoder eye diagram on the wrong sync. Finally, to picture the origin from the proposed perspective, we should rewind both times to pure superposed imagination and then see imaginary times developing towards opposite infinitives, as if absolute time and imaginary time emerged from a no-boundary model by Hartle and Hawking. The entanglement of the two times in the first kiss allowed, in the new geometry, the emergence of two new degrees of freedom, a 3D space in the first now. It was the bang of the first pulsing qubit, vibrating string, reference code, and eventually true heartbeat of our evolving and connected universe. Evolution eventually follows the true desire for transformation of entities and their wish for more persistence, assured in the absolute time entangled roots. From the memory of the first kiss, entities evolve with new degrees of freedom and the ability to entangle on shared code in a greater being, in a natural growth of complexities, abstractions, efficiencies, new equilibriums, and emerging properties as experiences stored in the memory of the absolute time, proving causality and coherence in a connected universe. Concluding, to assure a sustainable human ecosystem, collaboration is needed to develop the theory beyond nuclear power, towards a deeper understanding of matter and a safe quantum energy distributed production. Eventually, as human beings, it is crucial as well to share the fundamental idea that time matters as the gravity of our choices. We should look for coherence and entanglement, for more complex self and better human networks, simply being inspired by natural evolution towards a true, effective altruism.